fire that engulfed the Apollo 1 spacecraft. They were involved in a flash fire. Now what happened is the astronauts were in the command module and they were basically doing a simulation of the scheduled February 21st launch. They were just doing a simulation or a practice for the February 21st launch. They were scheduled to launch off, Apollo 1 was, February 21st. And they were doing a simulation, just a practice, you know, firing up the engines, whatever. Well, what happened is a spark caused a fire in the command module, and the astronauts were trapped behind those closed hatches, and they couldn't use the escape system because it was still on the pad and it had a frame around it, so to speak, to protect the capsule. So they couldn't get the doors open. They didn't anticipate, obviously, they were going to have a fire, and they were simulating some things that would have happened once the rocket got clear of the towers. That makes sense? So if they'd had the problem when they were going up, they could have emergency hatched out. Okay? Unfortunately, they had the frame around there, and they couldn't get out. And emergency crews tried like crazy to get them out of there, but they were blocked by dense smoke. They were blocked by this thing, and the 3 astronauts actually just burnt to death on the pad. Horrible disaster. And here are the astronauts of Apollo 1 right here. Gus Grissom, White, Roger Chaffee. Okay, so the first attempt at Apollo was an absolute disaster. It was just a horrible time. We've had 3 disasters. Apollo 1, we talked about the Challenger the other day, and then we had a problem with the Columbia Space Shuttle when it came back to Earth and disintegrated on re-entry. So we've had 3 space disasters in our history. Apollo 13 had every reason to be one, did it not? And it did not turn out to be one. It's just an unbelievable lucky circumstance. And we'll talk about that later. Okay, but the mission that I really want to concentrate on in the Apollo before the moon landing would be Apollo 8. Okay, Apollo 8 was a crucial mission for the United States and the space program. Apollo 8 was launched on December 21st, 1968 at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Apollo 8 was launched on December 21st, 1968 at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. December 21st, 1968, 7:51 a.m. Also is commanded by how many astronauts? 3. One is a new one you haven't heard of, William Anders. And the other 2 you've heard of, Frank Borman and Jim Lovell, both astronauts up here. Frank Borman and Jim Lovell, who flew in what particular mission we talked about? Gemini 7, very good. So Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders. Okay, who is the command module pilot? In other words, this is not going to be a mission that lands on the moon. It's a setup mission for that moon landing. So who is going to be the command module pilot? The one that's piloting the command module? Jim Lovell. He will be the command module pilot. What else kind of a pilot do you have to have if you're going to have a moon landing? Well, we've got another apparatus that's got to go down to the moon. What was that called? Lunar module. Okay, William Anders was the lunar module pilot. And what's the third person, do you think, then? If you've got one that's driving the car, the other one's driving the lunar module, or the LEM. No, you don't command the service module because it has no power to it. You're the overall commander, the man that commanded the mission, total commander of the mission, overall commander, was Frank Borman. Jim Lovell was the command module pilot. William Anders was the lunar module pilot. The one that oversaw the mission, was controlled the mission, was Frank Borman. Now there was 4 things that had to be done. The mission of Apollo 8 was a 4-fold mission. These were the 4 things that needed to be accomplished with Apollo 8. First mission of Apollo 8 was number 1, to evaluate the command module and service module performances in the lunar orbit. Have we ever had a command module and a service module in space up to this point? No. So they are evaluating how the command module and the service module perform in orbit. What else might be evaluated? The performance of who? The crew. So to evaluate the crew performance in a lunar orbit mission. So they're going to evaluate the command module and the service module, how they perform in the lunar orbit. They're also going to evaluate how the crew performs in a lunar orbit mission. Have we ever been close to the moon yet? No. So they're going to demonstrate how communication and tracking, is it going to work from a distance from the Earth to the moon? Are we going to be able to communicate? Or is NASA going to be able to track the space capsule at that distance? We've never been that. So are they going to the moon? Are they going to? Yeah, they are flying to the moon. And the reason they're doing that is they want to see if they can still communicate and track at that distance. They don't have any idea. Would this seem like a fairly dangerous mission? Certainly would. Absolutely. So they're going to send a ship farther than they ever have before, all the way to the moon, to see if they can communicate and track at that distance. And what else do you think they're going to take pictures of once they get above the moon? What are they going to take pictures of? No, they're above the moon.
They're going to take pictures of the surface of the moon.
Why?
So they know where they can and can't land.
Very good. They're going to take photographic pictures of possible landing spots on the moon. You think they're just going to wing this thing with Apollo 11 and land anywhere? No. They're going to see, Apollo 8's setting up Apollo 11 totally. They're going to see how the command module and the service module perform in space towards the moon. They're going to see how the crew performs in a distance flight that long. They're going to see if they can even communicate or track the spacecraft at that distance, and they're going to take pictures of possible landing spots on the moon for the moon landing. So that Saturn V rocket we talked about, Apollo 8 was the first manned space flight to use the Saturn V rocket. First manned to use it. Okay, did it have a lunar module in the vehicle? No, because they weren't making a landing. Okay, so they weren't testing that. So whoever decides to land on the moon is going to be the first one ever to descend down. You see what I'm saying? So there's no training for that. So in order to carry out its mission, Apollo 8 required a fully functional command and service module, but since no landing activities were going to happen, they did not include a lunar module in this particular flight, but they did have the pilot there to see how he would do. Okay? Well, after being in flight for 68 hours, 58 minutes, and 45 seconds, Mission Control in Houston lost all communication and tracking with Apollo 8. Again, after being in flight for 68 hours, 58 minutes, and 45 seconds, in which they had communication and tracking, all of a sudden they lost it with Apollo 8. So again, after being in flight for 68 hours, 58 minutes, and 45 seconds, Mission Control in Houston lost all communication and tracking with Apollo 8. Up to that point, they had full communication and full tracking. Why did they lose communication? Nope. They were on the other side. They are on the dark side of the moon. Okay? Apollo 8 had passed behind the moon for the first time, and at that moment, Borman, Lovell, and Anders became the first human beings to see the dark or far side of the moon. Somebody wrote a song about that, didn't they? Okay? So, they lost communication when they rendezvoused around the moon, because they're basically going to slingshot off the moon and head back. Okay? Well, in this mission, they also used audio and video telecasts back to Earth. Okay? They had 6 different audio and video telecasts in which the astronauts were communicating with Earth during the mission. Okay? They were talking to them, seeing them, etc. So there were 6 audio and video telecasts that were conducted during the mission of Apollo 8. But the most famous came on what date, do you think? What famous date? Think about when they took off. When are they going to have the most famous communication? Good, yeah, Christmas Eve. That's good. Christmas Eve was the most important. Well, Borman, Lovell, and Anders each read verses from the first chapter of Genesis. Live back. Borman, Lovell, and Anders each read verses from the first chapter of Genesis. And when they finished, they wished viewers back on earth, quote, good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth. They obviously were not, right? So, again, Borman, Lovell, and Anders each read verses from the first chapter of Genesis on Christmas Eve and finished their live broadcast, video broadcast, by stating to viewers back on earth, good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth. Well, the re-entry speed of Apollo 8 was 24,696 miles per hour. That's what they come in at. The re-entry speed of Apollo 8 was 24,696 miles per hour as they headed towards splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Imagine going that fast. 24,696 miles an hour. Apollo 8 eventually splashed down in the Pacific Ocean at 10:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 27, 1968. Apollo 8 splashed down in the Pacific Ocean at 10:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 27, 1968. And the ship that picked them up, the recovery ship, was the USS Yorktown. USS Yorktown. So they splashed down at 10:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 27, 1968. The splashdown resulted in the recovery ship picking them up, the USS Yorktown. So when they landed in the Pacific Ocean, it was exactly 147 hours after the initial launch and was precisely on time. It was a perfect mission. No hitches, no problems, nothing to deal with. It was a perfect mission. And the splashdown in the Pacific Ocean was exactly 147 hours after the initial launch and precisely on time. Now, if you're interested in the 2 significant things about it, first of all, the Apollo 8 mission included 10 orbits around the moon. They didn't go around once, they went 10 times after 9 more after the initial. And as I mentioned, it was absolutely a perfect mission, and it paved the way for the successful moon landing on July 20th, 1969. Without this particular Apollo 8 mission going perfectly, we're way off track to land on the moon. So it was a very important mission. We all talk about the Apollo 11 mission. I'm going to tell you right now that the Apollo 8 mission was probably more significant than the Apollo 11 mission that landed on the moon. Now, without it, we have no shot. Okay? Now, here's kind of our schedule so you know. We are going to have a short quiz tomorrow. We're just going to meet out into the commons, and I'll get it for you. It won't take but about 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll be back. And then I'm going to show you a biography on LBJ, Lyndon Johnson. And I want you to be able to take your notes out tomorrow and highlight the things that I told you that you hear from the lecture, and maybe add some things in that I didn't tell you. Then once we watch that, we're going to have a review, and then we'll have a test by the end of the week, and then we'll move on. Okay? Any questions at all? Perfect. Good job today. Make sure you study for that Reuben Hurricane Carter deal. I'll give you 10 questions worth 2 points apiece tomorrow. Meet in the Commons.